Hi everyone. A brief note before we get to this week's episode. This episode features discussions of dubious consent, non-consent, and discussions regarding interspecies relations during the course of transformation. We don't usually do an audio content warning, but given the topic nature, I think it's important to put it here. So if you're not interested in listening to that portion of the episode, you can jump to the timestamp noted in the show notes. I hope that you will all have an open mind in terms of the discussion contained herein. Thank you. Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the TFTuesday Podcast. My name is Zil. Today I have two more returning guests who I'm very excited to be chatting with today about a variety of different topics, including one selected by our patrons. So, Gabriel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Gabriel, and I am a full-time TF writer, and this is my second time, and I'm glad to be back.
Excellent, glad to have you. And we also have K-Libra with us today.
Hi, I don't know if anybody knows who I am. For those that don't, I am a transformation artist, at least I'm largely known that way, and I have been for a really long time. I wouldn't say I'm a professional, I just done a lot of commissions, and the things I do have kind of expanded into its own little community, which is nice.
Yeah, no, it's a very nice community, I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm really glad to have you both on, and I guess we'll get right into things. I was curious to kind of tackle a topic that I think sometimes a lot of us in the community kind of like skirt around because it can have not great implications sometimes. And I think that if we don't have a way to talk about it internally, we'll never have a hope of talking about it externally. And
so content warning.
Yeah, so content warning.
Very, very not safe for work.
Yes. So one of the things that often comes up when we talk about sexual encounters within TF is that often the line between consent can become extremely blurred, particularly when the changes are affecting someone who's unwilling. Now, of course, fiction is not real life, but I guess to kind of start off, what are your thoughts on TF media where consent to both changes and the resulting sexual encounters can fall into gray areas?
One of the ways I try to frame it, at least in my mind, is something I call consensual non-consent. Like, while the scenarios themselves are technically unwilling, the person who is requesting them, who's either commissioning them or wishing to experience them, is giving their consent by word of commissioning them or allowing them to, or requesting of the artist. So I think this kind of media is a safe space to explore those sorts of things in a way that allows the individual to be removed from them. That being said, TF in and of itself is sort of its own safe space to experience a variety of different forms of thought and sensation. So that gives, I think, an extra layer of removal from any sort of real life scenarios or anything that can be traced back to that by having it like fiction within fiction, so to speak.
It's interesting that you put it as like a fiction within fiction kind of way, because I mean, again, obviously, as I said in kind of the thrust of the question, fiction is not real life, but do you think that when someone is like potentially commissioning those sorts of things, we're not here to yuck people's yums, but also does that say something about ourselves if we're like into that kind of thing?
I completely disagree about that saying something negative. A lot of kinks are driven on things that we would never want to experience in real life, but like to play with within a safe space. I would love to delve into the psychology of kinks at some point. Like, I have a psychology minor, but I've taken like a basic sexuality course, and there might have been one paragraph about kinks in there somewhere. But a lot of these interests, I think, speak to us as a species or as a society rather than anything that necessarily translates to real life. And fiction gives us this way to explore those aspects of ourselves that are relatively common, a lot more common than I think society would tell us. Like when you look at like BDSM, for example, allows you to explore. Well, I say vanilla, but that's only because of being within the fandom and having lots of TF kinks. It's like it's more common, I'll say. But
Sure.
And there's nothing wrong with vanilla. I love vanilla, but I think it does give a space where you have that sort of like stop button if things get a little bit too extreme, but it allows you to explore that, like especially if you're doing it in person with the BDSM example, but also like within a commission where you have some say and control of where the commissioner's going with it.
I think that's sort of beside the question as far as whether it says something about us or not. Of course, it's a safe space. The fact that we can make what we do and ask people to make things for us does allow for all those safe things. It allows for all that exploration you talked about, but that doesn't necessarily go to the question of what does it say about us and does it say anything about us. I can't accept the fact that kinks are just like, yeah, we'll never really want it. How is that possible? That you would spend your time fantasizing and investing your energy into wanting to experience it only to say, yeah, I would never want to do that, really. It seems like a really convenient way to sort of create a dissonance, especially if you think that something is something unacceptable. Now, I remember your last episode, and you had a lot of things to say about how you like to shirk societal norms, which I understand. There's going to be a few recurring things regarding media, and also just like the framing and objective of what exactly it is that is getting shown. Because regardless of the fact that no, video games and movies will not turn you into any sort of like fucking terrible human being, but media does affect us regardless.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it can be one piece of media that inspires you into whatever direction, and other times it's for something else, something greater, however you're going to look at it. But media does affect us. And to be conscious of that means accepting that if we're going to be doing things, we're going to be mindful of what kind of impact we're going to be having on people. Even in the previous episode that was up with Angerboda and Abe, they did not like the words bitch and cunt. Mm-hmm. I don't mind those, but they explain why they don't like it, and they don't like to use it. They don't like to use it in their work, which is their way of being mindful that media affects people, and that media and how and what you're willing to show and how you're willing to frame things matters a lot. So does it say something about people and how they want to express things and what they want to express? It's weird to me.
Well, not to interrupt you, but in terms of, you referenced, for example, obviously video games, and there's like the whole panic around, violent video games driving like all these other things, and that has been disproven time and time again in a lot of research. So my question back to you then is, how are we able to separate that and be like, no, there's no connection, and then we turn to this and we're like, okay, well, maybe this says something about someone?
Because the media has a message to give. It does.
Mm-hmm.
If this was not a concern, like if media was just like, it's just a thing, then why is like propaganda a problem when it's geared toward like harmful things like right-wing extremist bullshit? Because it's a problem. And this goes to like every piece of media. And let's even go to the positive ones. Queer representation is important, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And it matters, doesn't it? And we want it in the media to normalize things, to get people familiar with them, to spread a message that like, hey, this stuff is okay, and if it is strange to you because you've never seen it before, here's a way to introduce it to you. And you can also do that very poorly if you mismanage it.
Yeah, that's true. But then back to the question of dubious consent in TF. I mean, is there therefore a proper way to do it? Like, is there a way that if you do it right, it can be okay, and if you do it wrong, it can be harmful?
Proper is such a loaded term. Because if you want to do it right, you just want to give the experience to the audience that wants it.
Mm-hmm.
One person's proper may not be applicable to another person.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's clear enough. It's just, and this is the other thing that's going to be, what are you framing?
Mm-hmm.
What are you framing? It's just like, okay, for instance, I don't like to feed into rape. I don't like non-consensual shit ever. because I don't like rape, and I don't want to, like...
You don't even want to risk having some sort of, like, condoning in your media is maybe what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't like that. That doesn't mean that there's never, like, oh, everybody is always completely willing with the transformations, which is the only thing that I could even remotely say. It's just like, was it forced? I'm just like, to me, I make it forced in the way that I could get a boner and I can't control it. Like that.
Yeah.
It's forced. But then there's that way where I like to frame it and I try to get that message across. There's other people is like, yes, you are strapped to the table, you're begging and pleading, please don't do this, and you're weeping, and you're like, please, I don't want to, and people are like, oh, that's hot, and I'm just kind of like, but that's also a terrible thing to do to somebody else, and I find it dubious when people are just like, yeah, that's hot, and I'm just like, then I want to have a conversation with them and be like, where does it go from there that, you're into the idea of somebody else's suffering being that alluring? That's where I go.
So, I really like what you said, and I think that definitely ties into it a lot. But, like, specifically going back to TF, because TF is impossible, it's that sort of exploration. Like, why are we even into TF if we'll never TF? I certainly understand that the importance of media and the importance of having, like, certain messages out there and the impact that they can have, but in something that's, like, entirely fictional, where does that fall within something that we actually desire?
It's easy. It's easy because we look at all kinds of media to inspire us, and that goes for, like, superhero movies too, even. You can really get into that. I can't be Batman, but I will go and I will try to help people any way I can. The fact that something can't exist doesn't absolve it completely of, like, responsible platforming or what is chosen to be framed, highlighted, and to be enjoyed. I like what my friend Pez said about non-consent in artwork, because when people do it, at least in her experience, but I've seen it too, it's just like, oh yeah, they really want you to know that the subject doesn't want it. Like, that is on full blast, and you're kind of like, oh my god, this is just saying, like, yes, enjoy the rape. And I'm just kind of like, no, don't normalize it. Like, be careful with that shit. It's different if you're just kind of like, babe, I can't control myself tonight, and I don't know if I can do whatever. It's just like, we do this each time, and we know it's safe. Yeah, honey, I'm just, it's like, well, be all right, trust me. And then, I don't know, they go ahead. And then by the end of it, there's also kind of like, everything turned out okay, right? Like, yeah, it's just, but, in between, that whole experience was had. Don't get me twisted on this. Transformation can't happen or whatever, but the whole, like, rape play thing is a real thing. And you can draw the parallels between those things. And you think to yourself, well, those people are doing something that, like, morally speaking, at least for me, it's just like, really, don't do this kind of thing. But they're both choosing to do this and act this scenario out because they're both not only okay with it, but they want it. And it's like, I can say nothing to that.
Okay. Well, let me pose a counterpoint then, because I think there's something to be said about people who enjoy this kind of thing, but particularly enjoy it as if it's happening to themselves. So, for example, if you are someone who is really into the idea of being, like, transformed against your will and, like, being almost, like, quote unquote forced into some sort of, like, situation afterwards, it may be a self-insert for that person. It's not even like a power fantasy. It's like, I want to be a victim fantasy.
Yeah.
So does that mean, therefore, that, if someone has that interest in that way, does that mean that that's a bad thing that they have? I mean, like, it's not always just a power fantasy onto other people. Sometimes it's you want to be, dominated or what have you in a way where, again, the lines are getting blurred in a scenario.
I see that as just, oh my god, it could be so many things, and so I'm just going to try to make, like, the broad strokes answer that makes the most sense. If they want it, they want it, and to get into it is a conversation with that person. What they want is just, it's what they want. And it's always going to be a different reason for that.
Yeah.
I can't make a prescriptive statement simply because that's just what happens. If somebody asks me to get involved in making content like that, I'll tell them no. But, to make a prescriptive statement of just like, you're bad for that. Nobody's really bad for that either, to, like, want it. But yeah, it's, I'm aware of that.
Yeah. Well, maybe then I can bring it back to you, Gabe, because, we were talking about earlier how, people will commission you to do these kinds of scenarios. And because they're commissioning it, and if the subject is often themselves, you feel comfortable depicting it. Do you think that that kind of aligns with what I'm saying, or do you think it's a completely different angle?
I think it does align more with what you're saying. Like, it's more of a, like that, like they're still giving consent to roleplay. Like, I want to bring back the example that I used in my previous podcast about talking straight to gay, which is something I really enjoy. Like, I like the idea of, like, being sort of forced into male-male scenarios, but it's not because I want to be forced, it's because I want to allow myself to like it, which is something that I have personally struggled with in my youth.
Right.
Well, not youth, but you know what I mean. But I'm in my 30s, so youth is like early 20s.
It's okay, we're all old here. We've made this joke multiple times.
Early 20s is very young, and I'm learning that.
Yeah, early 20s is very young, it's true. Yeah, but no, I understand what you're saying about the straight to gay. Obviously, I can see how someone could see that and be like, oh, that's not consensual. Actually, that kind of touches on, like, my other thought on this. This line that often comes up in a lot of these kinds of works is that, when your mental perspective starts to shift during a transformation, sometimes you'll get this contrast between, like, oh, an instinctive desire to, like, copulate or something versus, like, a human horror of the situation. And those things can get, like, intermixed with one another. So, that tension, a lot of people really like that tension. It can be really visceral. But, how do we then grapple with that? Like, is there a way that it can be handled in a way that's respectful of our interests, but also cognizant of the potential implications? Because, again, in that kind of scenario, there's almost an element of, like, the human side or what have you is like, oh, no, I don't want this to happen. But maybe we're still enjoying that.
I think it kind of goes back to that, or at least in the experience of my own body of works, is it's that allowment of giving into something that you feel you shouldn't necessarily, but exploring it in a way that you are able to give into something that you can only, like, basically imagine. And I think another aspect of it too is that you don't really know from a human experience what those instincts are like.
Yeah.
So you're essentially creating a facsimile of what that might be like. Because we can never get into the mind of an animal. Like, we can never experience things from an animalistic point of view. Like, it's just, like, we have to anthropomorphize everything that we look at. Just, that's how we are as a species. So I think there are parallels, but I think ultimately the creation is within the human mind. So giving into bestial instincts is our interpretation of them, and can also play into other more sort of widely known acceptances, like the whole like bondage, and you want to be restrained,
yeah,
but only when you're with somebody that's safe.
Mm-hmm.
That's two different things.
Well, no, like, I mean, it can be similar.
No, I'm sorry. What I'm trying to say is, like, it's the difference between, you went from, like, freedom to restraint sort of thing. It's a paradox is what I mean to say.
Well, because I think sometimes, like, some people can view it as freedom and other people can view it as restraint.
Yeah.
It can be dialectical in some senses. I'm not saying everyone approaches it that way.
I suppose. I mean, if you're restrained, then you have an excuse to do certain things too.
Exactly.
So that makes sense, yeah.
I think just in general, though, and I hope, like, this is the takeaway for folks in general, like, I hope people think critically about kind of why they're into some of these things. Not because, again, I'm not here to, like, shame people for an interest, but I also think that there are ways that we can have interests, and some of them can be healthy and some of them might not be. So, like, kind of hearkening back to some of the examples here, like, it could be like I'm, like, giving myself the freedom to be myself to some degree, or, like, because I'm restrained, I can, like, experience other things that I might not normally allow myself to. And I think there's a good benefit to that, or at least exploring it in that way. But it can also be an analogy to real world power dynamics. And if that's where the interest is coming from, then sometimes there's a need to, like, think a little more critically, I think.
Yeah, because you're stuck in your own head. And depending on what you're going to be entertaining will influence at least part of you. Mm-hmm. I didn't get to throw in my 2 cents about the line and if you can respect it. It all depends on what you want. If you're completely selfish, it doesn't matter how you're going to. It doesn't matter to you how you're going to come off to other people. The line is going to be all about what the artist wants to express, what the creator or whatever. And it's just like, how do you respect the boundaries? You only can if you want to. If you actually like give a shit about how you come off to other people, then yeah, surely you could do it to a greater effect. But the more selfish you are, the more things will come off blunt. And it's not always a bad thing, because art, I think, should like inherently be a lot of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, you can do it if you want to. If you don't, then you will give nobody any kind of you will give no implication as to something that's relatable to the viewer.
Yeah.
Because, for instance, if I'm doing like horny transformation or something like that, and I just like say like I have like somebody else like fucking them into the animal or something, it's kind of like, well, I can leave it that way and I'll know what it means. A lot of other people won't. And I'll just have to be mindful of that if that's the kind of thing I feel like sharing.
Yeah. That kind of leads into our next very light topic, which is,
very bright, hard to look at.
Yeah.
It's sort of blinding.
Yeah.
It hurts.
Nice rainbows.
Like a motherfucker.
Yeah, we're throwing all the softballs on today's episode.
Yeah.
Something that I often see in a lot of TF media is like, for lack of a better term, interspecies relations. Either like
bestiality.
Well, okay.
It's zoophilia.
Let me finish the question first. Like either it might be during the TF, so like someone's changing while it's happening, or like it might be post TF, so like you have a fully changed person in another like animal of their same species or what have you. Look, it's an easy gotcha that often gets thrown at people like who are into this stuff. Of like, oh, you must just be into bestiality. You must just want to fuck animals. And so my question is like, how do we separate that concept from the idea of it being a simple like, oh, this is just what you're into and you're into fucking animals? Like, how do we explain that in a way that is accessible to people? Because like for a lot of people, it's fairly confusing that you say, oh, I want to like turn into a dog, for example, and then also get fucked while I'm a dog. Like people will be like, so you want to get fucked by a dog? And it's like, well, how do I explain that nuance, right?
I'm going to start out with the Harkness diagram, if anyone's familiar with Doctor Who.
Yes.
So it's essentially like a little comedic infograph based on the character of Jack Harkness, who will literally fuck anything that is sapient and can consent, or at least flirt with. But I guess like just to kind of break it down, it's like this fictional creature, is it sapient? Can it respond to you? Does it speak the same language? Is it consenting?
Mm-hmm.
And talking about how hand gestures, that sort of thing, body language can be used, but is also very dubious. So bringing that kind of into TF, I think, and there are people who kind of toe that line. I'm not going to cast any judgment. Like, I've got my own line where I like to leave things. Mm-hmm. And, like, that is my comfort line. And as I get kind of commission requests, like, of certain interspecies things, I will look at that in terms of what I'm comfortable with. And, and do things like, I'm comfortable if two people are transformed and they retain at least enough sapience to consent.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, if I'm using... For example, I'm working on a few Patreon exclusives where that are interspecies, and I know like there are a lot of furry writers in general that'll do interspecies, but like I try to make sure that the one subject transforming the other is fully sapient, because that's my personal comfort level. And different people draw their lines at different points. Like, I do not condone harming animals at all, and nor do I think this is necessarily where we're going with this topic point. But I think sort of within that line, what can I do? And like in some cases too, like what can I do to move that line closer to where I'm comfortable with? Does this sexual scenario with this animal, does the animal have to have been can I change this a little bit? Like, I've gotten a few commission requests before. Can I change this so that this animal is mid-transformation when these things are happening, and there's more of that obvious humanity there? Can I make sure that the animal can consent? Is there some sort of literary device I can use where I can where that animal can communicate? And this is all extremely difficult to explain to a layperson, which is why I generally tell people I write werewolves. But there are certain facets of it, I think, that can be explored. And I think, just to kind of summarize what I'm saying, because I'm repeating myself quite a bit, there is a line, and different people have different lines, and I think being respectful of other people's lines as well is really important. Like, I have friends whose lines are further in one direction than mine, and are extremely uncomfortable with, and won't read, like, certain stories that I've written because it goes past their line, but they've told me, hey, I don't think this is amoral, I'm just not comfortable with this. So just being mindful of that when presenting media to other people is extremely important.
Yeah.
Again, this is going to be all about the framing. I'll give you an example, an easy one. I've seen a good amount of transformation porn, and it's usually been horses. It's like, this is a transformation piece. It's just a horse with its shit on display. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, it's over now. I'm only looking at, like, horse poon.
Yeah, it's like post, yeah.
And I'm kind of like, I don't want that, because that's a horse now. And then it's just like, oh, what if you're like in the middle of it and whatever, and it starts happening? I'll give you my line. If I'm doing stuff and the person starts changing, oh, yay for me. I find it very appealing. Like, oh, what if they're like finished changing, you're still in them? It's like, I'm going to finish myself, and that's going to be it. And then after that, it's cuddle time, because I don't want to fuck the thing they became.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in that. What if you're changing with them? That's the situation. How will I express that it seems okay or passes the Harkness test? If you're going to talk about it being like fiction and creative media and all that stuff, that's not an easy excuse to make just because, some people have their lines, because you can choose to represent that in very definitive ways. I painstakingly painted a sequence of a woman turning into a giant serpent, okay? Mm-hmm. And I made it evident at the end that she is in there and very clear and present. And it's just like, yes, I want people to know that it's not just like a mindless beast that she became, because I want to express that. But then you have like the other lines where it's just like, oh, honey, I know you're turning into a horse. Here, let me get you this regular stallion to like fuck you into the rest of it. I'm like, she is in this situation that she kind of doesn't want to be in, and she's going to have sex with a real horse. And a lot of this stuff is with horses, too, which is fucking wild.
There's a lot of...
The equine form is very popular.
Yeah, it's popular, but it's also like... It can be like fucking mean-spirited, too.
Oh, of course.
And I remember getting into this fucking conversation with somebody else in like an old Kick chat. Fuck Kick. But somebody was just like, oh, this is like one of my favorite pieces. I didn't say anything to anybody. I'm just like, man, that's a really fucked up scenario. And they're like, excuse me? How dare you say things about me? And I'm just like, is that a fucked up scenario or not? She's like weeping and she's in terror.
Yeah.
And then and they got like really defensive, which I understood, but I was just being like, I'm talking about the piece of work here.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't get off of it. So I'm like, fine. Fuck you and fuck this.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. I feel like a lot of people, when we start poking and prodding at some of these things that we're into, people take it super personally, and it's
they do, but this is another reason that we're talking about this now.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we need the self-awareness to understand that if we're going to be like, there are people who want this shit to go like mainstream. If you are not prepared to deal with at least that minimum amount of like, not even pushback, just like, damn, that looks kind of fucked up, man. If you can't deal with that, if you can't like get into a conversation, that shit ain't gonna go anywhere, and it's gonna be even less accepted. Already, there was like a wired conversation. It's like, would you fuck Small or whatever the fuck, that dragon?
What?
It was like a fucking Lord of the Rings dragon or some shit.
I'm not recalling the conversation.
There was like a bit of discourse that like reached me. People were like talking about, is it okay to fuck Smog? Because Smog is like a 10,000-year-old dragon and is like smarter than humans, and technically fucking a human would be like bestiality because human consciousness is below the dragon or whatever. I'm like, all right, I guess people are now having a conversation about whether it's okay to like fuck a non-human or not. The whole point of all of that is that you can clearly illustrate what it is you want to highlight. Mm-hmm. I want to fuck this horse, and then I turn into a horse. I'm like, you're still doing the zoophilic thing. If the display is like horse junk, is like a full horse, or like any kind of thing, even like lizards like laying with their legs splayed, you know, and they have like their shit out, and I'm just kind of like, that's a lizard. That's a lizard.
Well, okay. Now let me make this one point, because this discourse has been going around a lot on Twitter lately. I don't know if you've seen it. It's like a redux kind of to some degree of like the burned furs, I think. But like, there's people who also go around and they're like, oh well, if your fursona has X trait, that means you're into bestiality.
Oh, I've heard of this.
Those people can fucking... Can't say that, but they should, because it might make things easier. God damn it, man! Look, it's interesting, but also like, it's all about the framing. Mm-hmm. If it's just like, look, this thing belonging to another creature, it is obviously like, I love the way the Pez said it. They will want you to know it. They will put it on blast. This is an animal cock. Don't you want it? It's taboo. It's everything that society tells you not to do, and it's kind of like, I know not to listen to everything in society, but what are you trying to tell me?
Yeah,
I do really like the point you made in the last topic, where thinking critically about why you're okay with what you are, and I think that's extremely important and definitely applies to all of this conversation, but like particularly here.
Yeah, and I think something else I just say to that is like, the point around the framing, I think, is really key, because I think that is actually kind of the line for most people, in the sense of like, they look at the framing and then they make a judgment call. And so then I think the concern sometimes is just the fact that there are definitely people who fall on the right side of the line, I'm just going to phrase it that way, but worry about producing content that can like lead up to it. A perfect example is like, you get commissioned to do something and you're clearly like, the idea is like within like your comfort zone and you feel fine doing it, but it does touch up against some of these things, and it's like, how do I go about portraying this in a way that I know is in line with my values and doesn't like cross a line?
All right, so that's what you do. Sometimes you can either do it or don't. You either take the job or you don't. If it goes against it and you have to like think that hard about how to manipulate it because you need the money, I mean, that's your job, Gabe. If you're fucking doing this for a living, then I get why you have to think that hard. Since I don't have to do that, I choose not to. So you think about the situation. Is this your living and that's the kind of shit you gotta eat? Well, fuck. That sucks and I sympathize. If you don't, think about what it is you're putting out there and you're kind of feeding into. We can talk about this with our own biases. Like, we like transformation porn, so we don't want to demonize it. But by the same token, look at Loli and Shota. Oh, yeah.
Dear.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Geez.
Cannot ignore that when you're thinking about a topic like this. This is a safe space to explore whatever you want. Yeah, well, so is that. And we have problems with it for obvious reasons, and I think the same sort of scrutiny should be afforded, or at least the same kind of self-awareness. Because
the line isn't even nearly as blurry there. That one's just straight up fucked.
It's not, but it's blurry if you have the bias. And again, I understand the bias. It's like, well, it's not the same as that. It's not. It's a different problem. Yeah. It's a different problem, but it's also, and it's got other complexities, because this is this is a fantastic subject. Completely fantastic, that raises a lot of questions that normally you wouldn't even fucking ask of yourself.
Yeah, most people, like the average person on the street, is not thinking about these questions.
It's like, how weird can your dick get before it's okay to use or want?
Yeah.
Like, how come it's bestiality if it's a dog dick, but not if it's just got like, a bunch of like lobes and shit all over it?
Yeah.
But again, it's the framing. It's what you're going to put on display and what kind of thing you're going to communicate. If you're going to talk about how like, oh, they can't think anymore and only the instincts or whatever. And then it's just like, I think you mentioned it before, like the instinct shit came up as like, oh, what about that? What about consent? What if it's whatever? I'm like, well, if somebody's in like such heat that they can't fucking think, it's kind of like being roofied. It's exactly like being roofied. Yeah, you're under the influence of a thing and you could be taken advantage of. Mm-hmm. Like, all this stuff is stuff to think about.
Yeah.
And this is especially because I had a personal experience with somebody who I have a relationship with, that when I first told her, hey, I like this thing, and I really don't want you to think I want to fuck animals. And what does she think for a little while?
That you want to fuck
Do
animals.
you really want to, though? Because it sounds like you do. And that took a while for her to be like, okay, it's like this. I want these things and not these things. And these things in a very specific way and not in this way. Do you understand? Eventually she was like, okay, I get it. I get it. And then it was totally fine. But it took a while. And you also have to grapple with yourself like, man, do I really want that? And I'm like, no, I don't. I don't want that. And then you can be comfortable and then you can have this conversation about all this shit.
Yeah. So then I guess my question for you both, maybe I'll ask Gabe first, like if you're trying to explain being into TF to someone in a conversation, like someone, obviously we're using the example of like someone you care about because like random people probably not going to have this conversation with you. But like if you opened up about like being interested in TF and the first question is like, oh, so like you want to fuck animals, like how do you respond to that question? Like how do you explain that that's not what you're into to someone who maybe has those misconceptions?
I guess just straight up saying, no, I don't want to fuck animals. Like, that's not what this is.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, again, I think it kind of depends on how well you know the person and what level you think they're comfortable with. Because, like, some people are going to get it and some people aren't. Like, my own close relationships are with TF people. So, like, they get it. Because it is, like, a common shared interest.
Yeah.
But it is, I think, very... Without, like, getting into, like, the psychology of it, it's like... Some people are going to think X is okay, some people are going to think Y is okay, and some people are going to be, like, extremely...
I just want to make it clear that I do understand, or at least have the notion, the baseline, that human sexuality is a very complicated thing. My thoughts and feelings on this are exactly what they are, and if I get to know somebody, I'm going to get to know about them better and their nuances. I think I know where you're going with it, so please continue, but I wanted you to understand that I don't think flatly of human sexuality because I've thought about my own a lot.
No, I think you're making some very valid points just about if X is okay, why not Y?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll comment on like some of the work I do. Like, I take on projects that don't personally interest me just because it is a job, and sometimes that's the clientele you get, but I do try to frame, like, I have lines that I do not cross, and I try to bring everything over that line, or else I just can't work with the client. Like, if they want something very specific. But yeah, it does suck to a degree that you do have to think about those things, but I guess at the end of the day, it is a job, and I imagine it's something that anybody who works with erotic material has to think about to a certain degree, and this is obviously a little bit more of a rabbit hole than, say, like, regular erotic fiction that you would, like, I could never publish and be on a bookshelf, for example, but...
Oh, you could. If you really wanted to, you totally could.
I mean, I'd support it.
There's already... Listen, all right? I'm going to make it clear to you, and you can look into this on your own time. But for a little while, I got wind of another little controversy that was happening where people were noticing that, like, hey, these, like, werewolf novels and shit like that? Yeah, they seemed, like, strangely zoophilic, And it's kind of like, So maybe some people are trying to sneak those themes in there because, again, it's about what you want to frame and what you want to present.
Yeah.
And maybe some people are trying to sneak that shit in. But if you really, really wanted to, you could definitely make yourself like, my lover of the moonlight or some shit like that. And you could have your transformation novel.
Copyright.
Yeah.
You're welcome. I'm an idea guy.
Yeah.
If you want to pay me for some ideas, we can talk.
But I will also say, like, I think that in, like, your body of work, Gabe, I think that you do a good job of walking that line from what I've read. And
thank you.
I think that it's a difficult position that sometimes you get put in when it's your job. Like, again, you can say no to certain clients, and I think that's good. And sometimes you have clients that you just need to be more cognizant of, and you have to walk a certain line, and that's just kind of how the job can be. But again, I think to what you've said, Libra, like, a lot of it just rests in the framing, and I think that when we do talk about these topics with people who aren't immersed in them, yes, you can say, like, I'm not into that, but, like, it also helps to have done, like, the internalized introspection first, so that you can explain in a nuanced way why your interest doesn't fall on the wrong side of the line.
Yeah, and it's hard for people to talk about for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to get defensive about this shit, especially since a ton of it is wrapped up in shame. So much shame.
There's a lot of shame.
And I started with a lot of shame too. And thankfully, I got rid of a lot of it. And I'm going to keep doing my best to get rid of more and more of it. But, it's something that I just want to ask some people, like, why this? Just why? And it was just like, oh, I just like it. And I'm just going to be frustrated with that answer most of the time. Especially when I'm asking, like, the person specifically, hey, you seem to bring these things up constantly. Why? And they're like, I don't know. I just like it. You don't know, but you do it every single time without fail. And you're verbose about it. Yeah. Please tell me why. For like a fucking second, please. Don't go into like talking about like, oh, why does anybody else like, why does anybody like anything? Okay, Master Shake, that's fine.
Well,
why is anything?
I mean, that also like brings back another point I think from the episode with Angaboda and Mabe. Like when we talk about shame versus cringe, there are some things that sometimes when you see in media, you cringe at it and you're like, that's because I'm noticing, like, to tie it directly to this line, it might be like, that's going over the line for me. And that's a good thing, and people should think about that. Obviously, like, I'm not saying you're saying this. Some people might have shame about, like, stuff in this, like, realm in terms of things that bump up against this idea. And sometimes it's like, think about that thing. Think about that feeling as to why you're cringing against it and really, like, critically think as to why you might still be indulging in it.
Yeah, but cringe is, like, a broad thing, too. And without getting into too much nuance, I just want to go for like specifically this. If you're cringing at something, you might see yourself reflected in it.
That's true as well.
Never simply just like, oh, does that make you feel uncomfortable? It's just like, no. If you're cringing at something, do you see yourself? Do you see that and think, oh, I like that, but that's an embarrassing version of it? Or maybe it's painfully honest. Maybe it's unabashed, and you can't possibly think of yourself doing that.
Yeah.
Because different people cringe at different things. If you watch the same scene, and some people will not be affected. But we keep this like mostly to this topic. And if you're going to be looking at people turning into stuff, like not even just like animals that we know exist, just like monsters and stuff, which is its own thing too. You're like, hey, I have questions about this.
Yeah. Well, we will get to the monsters. I do want to move on actually to an actually lighter topic, and that's around mental changes, which was suggested by Patrick Coyote, one of our patrons. When it comes to like mental changes, it can often be like a real make or break moment in a TF for a lot of people. Like some people prefer that the mind stay completely unchanged. Others like will gravitate towards extremes like identity death. So my question for you both is kind of, how do you approach changing mental states within your own personal work to start?
I've got a hot take on this one.
Okay.
You can't actually properly write identity death or depict identity death.
Interesting.
Because we don't know what identity death is. I touched on this a little bit before because we as humans frame everything from a humanistic point of view. So identity death would be the loss of that humanity, and I think we are incapable of species of actually conceptualizing that. So anything that we do come up with is framed from that anthropocentric viewpoint, where we think an animal or an alien or a couch would think and react in certain situations, but we can't know.
Right.
Because we are incapable as a species of truly conceptualizing it. So I think when people are looking at identity death, they are doing their best to put themselves in that situation where they think that all of the traits that they have are gone and all of the traits within whatever particular thing they're transforming into are present, but they're still framed through that lens.
Okay, but counterpoint. Yes, I think it's correct to say that we can't know for sure, but isn't the way in which it is portrayed a conceptualization of sorts by humans of those particular states? Like, it might not be, the most accurate because, again, it's unknowable, but isn't that still a spin on that topic?
Yes, I would agree with that. Yeah, I think you're essentially removing all aspects that you know that you can. So while it's not necessarily quote unquote true identity death, I think it is exploring that to the best of our ability.
Mm-hmm. And within your own personal work, like, what do you like to do with mental changes? Like, do you tend towards no changes to the mind? Do you like the more extreme ends? Like, where do you personally fall?
I like maintaining enough humanity that you know you're aware of the experience so that you can compare it to what you've known, what you've grown up with, like what you've experienced all your life, and be like, this is what's different, this is what's cool, this is what's neat, my sense of smell is so much better, my hearing is better, I'm massive and powerful, or I'm, small and get into, various areas.
It's more like a perspective change than like a mental change, really. You could get into really nuanced stuff, but that's not really changing like your mind itself as the concept of what we think a mind is. It's like, I am strong, fast, and I can sense new things. That doesn't really change the mind.
Well, actually, I would argue it can.
Not inherently. The changes will come later because you will be forced, because if you're forced to live a certain way, you are going to change mentally and emotionally. But like inherently, like as a new thing to experience, your mind isn't changed. If you're put inside a tank, and you know that you could roll through cars, blast buildings, and exert all this kind of power, are you mentally changed? Like right there?
Well, am I in the tank or am I the tank?
You are in the tank.
Okay, can I be the tank though?
You want to be the tank? You are a tank now. You can exude all this power.
Yeah. But okay, let's run with it. I actually like this example. Like, let's say you are the tank, and okay, your mind hasn't like technically changed, but you can like feel all these new feelings. You have this new power that you can unleash or what have you. You're arguing that that's not a mental change because even if you have these new additional things, be it senses or powers or what have you, your brain is still inherently intact and the mental changes will only come later.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. Mental changes for a transformation for me would be like, I need to go dig a hole. I need to go prepare for something. I am compelled to do X, Y, or Z activity or function with no real understanding of why. But you are compelled, and therefore you will do it.
Okay.
You'll understand, like, you will have this inherent need to do it because now that's what you are.
Okay.
That qualifies as a mental change to me. But if I have, like, 4 new arms and I can see out of, like, an extra eye and shit like that, and it's just, like, I can perceive these things. I can, like, start doing these things. I'm me. I'm me right now. The me that's going to come along is going to be later. So, like, in a way, I'm sort of arguing for both sides where I could say, yeah, that's mental change, but also that's not actually part of the transformation itself because, with like the mental changes thing, it's like, oh yeah, I didn't understand why I need to start rolling over to make people happy, but I'm doing it now. That's where I go with that.
But then do you like incorporating those things in your personal work?
It depends. I mean, I kind of like instincts, but there's the sort of thing that doesn't like override somebody. Just like, oh man, I kind of have like the feeling that I just want to go and like, swim as deep as I can or something like that, but you won't like practically hurt if you're not doing it. Like I must, if I don't do this, I have to.
Yeah.
And there are some changes, some mental changes that are written that way.
Yeah, that's true.
You know what I mean? So I'm like kind of light. I enjoy being playful with it, as like an accent in addition to, not to replace. A mental change to me also implies that you are overwriting something.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, which is also how like identity death itself is supposed to be.
Yes.
Do we understand exactly what the other thing is? No, but it doesn't matter because we know what death is to the best of our ability.
Well, then you get into the nuances of what is and isn't identity death, and I think that's probably would take a whole episode. So
no, I understand that, but it's just like the idea that we don't know like exactly how an animal would be doesn't take away from like what we again are framing, what we are showing, what we are trying to express. This person is gone, and in is this, and the old thing is gone. meaning that the person you knew is gone. A,
Mm-hmm.
death. So regardless of how it's expressed and whether it's true or not, doesn't take away from the fact of what people are trying to express.
What do you think, Gabe?
Yeah, I agree from that standpoint where it's like it is cessation of being, and whether or not we can conceptualize, I suppose it doesn't really matter to the enjoyment of it for some people. Although it is a little bit of I won't say it's necessarily a gray area because it's maybe I can say it's a gray area. The fact that I'm pausing, I think, implies that it's a gray area.
You can say a lot of things are gray area because morality is pretty much
It's
local
a
to the
lot of
individual.
gray. Yeah, that's
But
true.
we're trying to keep things as simple as possible.
I think, put simply, like the idea of, like Libra was saying, was like identity death is a form of death. How do we feel about death replacement?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how does that reflect on what we're looking for in doing so, in like having that kind of identity death?
Yeah.
Or is there something they're looking for within that new identity that they can translate to their own awareness of it?
Yeah.
And I think that's an important question to ask too when it comes to identity death.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting you mentioned that because, like, oftentimes when people think about mental changes, not just like mental, like identity death, but just like those mental changes in general, I think a lot of people think about how that change can affect their social connections between themselves and other people. So I was curious to know, like, when those social connections come into play in both your works, what kind of elements do you like to explore?
I just like the playfulness of being able to do new things and
Mm-hmm.
being able to experience the world in a new way. I don't know, man. If you got a new body and you can do new sexy things, then that's also really cool. If I'm going to talk about like the social aspect, it's mostly about fun, but there also is like some people, and I would fancy this too. It's like some people want to explore that as being a protector of sorts,
Mm-hmm.
or to even just use yourself to attack things that you don't like or that you don't find or that you think are wrong. Be your own hero. Had plenty of my own fucking hero fantasies growing up. Still got some.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Socially speaking, that's how I like to entertain those ideas. If it's like romantic or sexual, it's mostly fun. It's kind of like let's indulge in life pretty much
Yeah.
in as many ways as possible. Uh, and yeah, and otherwise it's like yeah, let's do cool shit. Let's be good to each other, sort of thing. I like to be generally positive.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. What do you think, Gabe?
I think I'm actually very much the same way. I like to, even in situations where, like, oh, I don't want this, I can't want this, I like to frame a positive spin on whatever the person ends up as. And
Yeah.
again, I'm not a huge fan of identity death myself, but I like there to be enough there where the person can appreciate, and not only can but does appreciate the aspects, and a lot of those are sexual, as it comes up in my body of work. But but yeah, just like Libra was saying, like experiencing the world, having fun with this new body, finding things about it to enjoy is something I prefer to explore, even in like those like darker scenarios.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things, and many guests I think have said this at various points during this season, like it's really interesting to see how someone that you knew before you changed might interact with you based on how you look now after your changes. And sometimes is like a mental change that plays into it on your end in terms of like whether it be like kind of like lighter like impulses or like a more strong change. But one thing I always think is really interesting is how people either like show it in their work or articulate it in like some of the explanations in terms of if you turned into a dog for an example, like, and you knew people who are now like viewing you as like a pet and you can't communicate that back, how does that dynamic change, and how do you as a person like connect with that? Because some people really like, to use an example, like some people like the idea of like TFing into a pet, and it's like, oh well, now I'm going to get shown like a lot of like caring and warmth and like that sort of a thing. And that's what draws them to those scenarios. Not even so much the change or like the specifics of the change. Obviously, there's a change going on there physically, but like some people might be drawn just to that kind of like comforting connection in a way that I always think is really interesting. And sometimes mental changes can play into that too.
Mm. It's a fun idea because I think that's a pretty lizard brain thing. Because like and the reason I put it that way is because like, oh man, it looks like it'd be so much fun to cuddle that or be cuddled that way.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to try it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like why I enjoy like snake monsters and stuff like that. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, long snake body wrapped around me. It seems comfortable, comforting. I like that. So it's just like, yeah, me too. Sometimes like I would want to do the same, where it's just like, let me just engulf you in my affection, sort of thing.
Yeah.
For me, it's like a really simple thing, because I like the feeling of it, so I want it, and I want to give that to some other people too.
Yeah.
And when I've thought about it, it just really is kind of simple for me in that way. I don't have like the desire to like find affection that maybe I don't quite get, or to help with certain traumas that I have. But yeah, as far as I thought of it, it's very simple. Like, it seems like fun.
Yeah.
For me, it's something like I've explored with like role play with like specifically my significant other, one of them. But it's not like Libra was saying, like it's not fulfilling anything that I feel is missing. It's just more of a way to like for example, I'll use the example of being a horse. You know, being ridden, being brushed. You know, having my massive belly rubbed, that sort of thing. Like it's not like affections that I'm missing. I don't feel like I'm losing out on affection and I'm looking for it. It's just like different types of expression that are...
Yeah, that motherfucker looks like he's having a great time. Oh, that looks so good. I want that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because I also think that, like, building off of that in terms of, like, not looking for things you might be missing, there are some people who go that route. And so when I say that, what I mean is, like, sometimes people can see mental changes as, like, a form of self-actualization in the terms of, like, shedding elements of themselves that someone might perceive are holding them back. So I always wonder, is that sort of dreaming healthy, or should we instead be examining the parts of ourselves that we want to shed and question why we haven't done so ourselves? Because, the thrust of mental changes is often, in these cases, it's like, oh, maybe I have like an anxiety about something and I'm going to be confident. And my question then is like, okay, that's great. I support that. But should we also be thinking about, ways that we can self-actualize that in our real lives? Because that kind of a mental change is something that you actually can achieve if you really put in the work.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Like, I'm going to use myself as an example. Like, I have, like severe depression, anxiety. And when I was first discovering TF as a fandom, as a concept, I would want to shed those aspects of myself that self-punish, that felt guilt, that felt like these misplaced sort of childhood traumas. Like, wouldn't it be nice just to go be a dumb horse in a field and like eat grass and not feel this childhood guilt for a while? Like, mm-hmm. just an escape, just a respite. And like I have, since gone through therapy and worked through a lot of these issues. And I think that kind of comes to the point where I will say that it is fun to think to shed some areas, but also that, and I'm just going to steal from Lee, but the framing of what you're getting rid of and why you want to get rid of can lead to, like, through self-reflection and outside assistance, like professional assistance, can lead to those changes, like figuring out, why it is that I don't like this aspect about myself. Like, it can be fun to fantasize about, but I think it should actually be something to reflect upon and see if that is something that needs more work.
Yeah.
when it comes to, there's one thing, and Gabe can give 2 cents about it if he wants to later, but whether it's healthy or unhealthy, I don't think it's that simple. It's always going to come down to how they are letting it overtake their life. If indulging in the fantasy becomes the only way for them to actually survive, days or day to day, then you have a lot of work to do, and you need to put that aside.
No, absolutely.
But talk about the safe space thing. It is a really cool thing to have your space to evaluate yourself and introspect and toy with what ifs. Yeah, I do agree that if you're going to be, talk about like mental changes and stuff like that, and fantasies that you indulge in, then sure, go ahead. Let that make you understand yourself, because my introspection has led me to understand more things about myself. Even stuff that I was a little shy about, I'm like, you know what? I guess I fucking like that. And that feels good.
Yeah.
When you feel good about yourself, you change and you grow and you even mature. You get all those good things. Take some time. Sometimes suddenly you wake up the next day after thinking about something and you're like, yeah, from now on I'm different. People can do that. But in case you can't, you totally still can with the amount of time that you need. So whether it's healthy or not, again, that's very case by case. If you want to frame the points of somebody who can't deal with, who can't live without it, ask your friends for some support. If you gain the self-awareness for it, professional help is good, but it's so hard to get. It's so hard to get in the first place, and then it's hard to get one that works.
Yeah. And it's even harder to get in some other countries.
Yeah, and I will stress this for anybody who is even like remotely interested about like embarking on that, which is it's kind of scary to do. Which sounds weird. It sounded weird to me, but it's a scary prospect to embark on therapy. And just know that if you can't get therapy, please, like, your trusted friends, or if you make a trusted friend, have a support system to help guide you, because therapy is great in the office, but anything you do in there, you still have to take home and work with.
Yeah, that's true.
It doesn't begin and end in the office or with the session.
Yeah, you don't go in somewhere and then all of a sudden the therapist waves a magic wand and you're cured and then you just leave.
He took 3 points off my anxiety. I'm good.
Yeah. It's a journey.
Yeah, it's a journey. And you also regress, and then you progress. It's not straight,
linear. Yeah,
it's not linear. It's about a trend. You do your upward trend shit. So back to like the original point, like, is it healthy or not? It doesn't really matter. It can be quite beneficial. It can be quite harmful. Yeah. I say, again, so like even the beginning of this whole thing, we have to be self-aware about what we're doing.
Yeah,
and that's harder for some people than others.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I agree, and I think that's a really good point in terms of the pushback on the healthy point. I think you're right in that it really just depends on the person, and it depends on how important that has become to them. And, again, everyone, can use a bit of an escape now and then from, like, the stress of the real world, but it's also a matter of looking into why you're doing it and if there's ways that you can also, like, improve yourself. So I think that's a good point.
Like even taking on the superhero pose, if you're just like, I'm going to turn into my real self, before I go to this job interview, I'm going to swing my tail confidently and blah, blah, blah. And you can imagine that. And I don't think it's really any different from taking the fucking superhero pose before you walk into their office. It's the same fucking shit. Yeah. Help yourself. It's good. Yeah. And like, I'll also say this, if you have like a persona and you're just like, I wish I was that, and like, you can totally become like parts of that will matter. Yeah. And it'll be good for you. I'm not even trying to be cheeky or patronizing. No, like, give it a try. Maybe you can't be that big or that small or that fucking fluffy or that pudgy or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Take the aspects from that and actually incorporate yourself. Let that be you, just with like a different presentation and maybe a few little fun bells and whistles. Mm-hmm. It can be you.
That is literal advice that my therapist has told me before too. So
self-actualization.
Yeah, no, it's like, that's what you want to be, and you're in a tough situation and you don't know how to deal with it. Pretend that you're TF'd into that and see how it goes. It can work quite well. So something to think about, I think, for people. I think the last thing I wanted to talk about with you both was kind of the appeal of the monster, because I think Both of your bodies of work speak to an inherent appeal towards the monstrous and those who embrace a monster that they've become. And so I was curious to get more of an understanding behind what drives that interest. So I guess as like a entry level question, what is it about monsters that you like?
They used to scare the hell out of me when I was a kid. And those feelings of fear were fascinating. In the moment, there's that like adrenaline rush and there's that like horror, you want to be out of that situation at all costs, but like reflecting on it, it can be, and this is something I've heard from like other horror aficionados, like it's a way to experience those sensations in a fictional setting that like, because obviously we don't have xenomorphs or predators or unfortunately werewolves, but like that's always been just kind of like decoding the monster has been my personal interest in it. And within my body of work, I've not written nearly as much like horror as I've wanted to, just because of my commission base. Not that I don't like what I write. I love what I write. Mm-hmm. But like one of my sort of like secret side projects, if I had like time and energy to do, would be more horror focused, like more body horror transformation.
You have written a few, though.
Yeah. It's something that I would like to delve into a little bit more. The other thing I really liked about it is, and we kind of touched upon this a little bit earlier with mental change, or isn't it mental change, but like looking at how, not necessarily mentally, but how like physically being different forms would take on. Like, I have 13 eyes now. How do I see the world? Like, I'm this giant like centipede monster that lives underground and I'm sensing vibrations. How is that? But I can't see, but I just have this massive mouth and I just go around eating. Like, what would that be like? And it's fun to think about and like compare what these different sensations would be like.
Yeah.
Think about like Superman with that. Superman can hear everything. And Superman is so... I like this framing for Superman specifically, where it's like, you can hear everything. How do you focus?
Yeah.
How do you not go insane? How do you deal with the fact that you are so strong, you could crush the world? And like, even on this like one, this old trading card game I used to play, where one of the flavor text for one of the Superman cards was like, Superman's most amazing feat is controlling his incredible strength. And I was like, oh, I like that.
Yeah.
It's so like you were saying, where it's like, what's it like to be that? Even Superman is a pretty good study of how do you deal with that and how does it change your perception of the world when you can see through most things, you can destroy most things. When so few things are actually an obstacle to you, what do you choose to do?
Yeah. So would you say that Superman's a monster?
Superman is a monster. Superman is most definitely a fucking monster. He is absolutely, he defies so many fucking things. Even conceptually, you're like, why? Where even that they had to, like, make an excuse as to why his outfit takes so much time to actually get torn up. Certainly, the outfit itself is not Superman, but to see that shit get like torn off his chest finally, only when he fights like a god, is like, you don't have magical clothing in a magical world.
Yeah.
Why? Why? So they make something up and you're like, Superman, you make no fucking sense. But we have to just accept you.
We have to just accept
And it's just like, man, imagine what it would be like to be that. And now you just expand from that concept to giant centipede creature living underground, feeling all the vibrations and having all the eyes to work with.
Yeah, I mean, which is an upgrade in my opinion.
It's definitely it's more fun for a few reasons.
But in terms of the appeal for yourself, what do you think is like the appeal for like monsters?
Oh, it's a bunch of things. I'm very sure that Felicia is just my gateway monster because she had like these unusually large hands with very big claws, but what I consider a very attractive body. And, I'm just like, also into like the muscular stuff. And it's like, she shaped that a lot. She shaped a bunch of things. And I'm just like, what else has like big claws or like very scary teeth? Or I'm just like, hey, that's good. And my scale kept sliding. I'm just like, yeah, just like some straight up monsters are like really appealing to me. And I think that has everything to do with my perception of beauty and also my admiration for like power and just the desire to be able to like and this is another like callback to the previous episode, but it was like when Honey Bear said, the fact that something that could tear you to pieces loves you so much that they won't, and that they'll be careful not to do so. That's like super, like yeah,
hot.
me. That's not just hot, but I'm just like, yeah, me too, please.
Yeah.
It's like.
I mean, I'm saying it's hot, but yeah.
Well, wouldn't it be awesome if your very hot monster lover was just like, they stand up and they rise like 9 feet into the air, and they just like take the one who was just like menacing you, and it's just like, and now you're like, no, it's okay. They've shit themselves enough, and it's like, fine, and they throw them away like 30 feet, and they're just like, I'll never do that again, and you feel just so good. They're just like, my lover did that for me. I'm so happy. I'm so lucky, and it's, just and it's stuff like that, and like fuck, man, more lizard brain for me. It's just like, I have achieved great thing. The monster loves me. I won another thing in life. It's like, yeah, and like also because like the concept of a monster is like. It could be whatever.
It's very societal based.
Yeah, and whatever's a monster, it can range from anything just from like what we consider to be incredibly fearsome to just like abhorrent.
Yeah.
To like oh fuck, just straight up beautiful. Your skin is made out of like, I don't know, it grows emeralds or some shit like
this
that.
This is the skin of a monster, Bella.
Yeah, it's like
I'm sorry, I couldn't help it.
It's just, but yeah, there's just so much fun to be had. But that's like the appeal, and then also like, let's not fucking kid ourselves. It's like, how does that work for me?
Yeah.
How does that feel to like get into? How does that feel if it like gets, yeah, that looks like fun.
Yeah.
It's just on so many levels.
Yeah.
And even. And here, I'll give you one more personal thing. I'm not sure how many people think about this, but it's just like, what if you really please your monster lover? And there's like a specific thing that they do or that causes their body to do something. And you're just yeah, they came. I love it when they do that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, it's funny you mentioned the sort of like, monster can be anything that society kind of finds abhorrent or grotesque. Oftentimes a lot of monsters are considered queer-coded. And so I was curious to know how that connection makes you both feel. And, like, is that a valid connection to make when there's, like, plenty of, like, non-queer folks who also find a deep interest in monsters? Like, how does that kind of connection often rest with you?
I really like hearing, sometimes I don't click in, but they're like, oh, this monster was queer coded, and it just makes me smile inside. Like, I'm just like, oh, there was this thing for us. Other people can enjoy it too, and that's okay, but there's that little aspect that's just for us, and that makes me smile.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
It's pretty simple for queer folk to relate to that in that basic way. For me, it's gonna obviously be more complicated since I'm not. It's interesting to look at because then your perception of what the theme of the monster was supposed to be changes. Because for a long time, just like the monster expresses this, the monster is that, and then many years later, it's just like, did you ever notice like all these things and these trends and how they could be like very easily correlated? And it's just like, well, humans look for patterns and we end up finding things that aren't really there. But with the monster stuff, it's just like, oh, it has become like increasingly clear. Like the patterns are too hard to ignore or dismiss. Yeah. It would be very convenient to say that these things don't mean anything.
Yeah, but they clearly do.
Yeah, and so for me, it's like I like seeing that stuff. Not just for the fact that, oh yes, this is for like these kinds of people, but also just like, wow, their message still came across to me in a way that mattered to me. So if I want to think about it in those terms, I find the meaning in that. It also just kind of helps you, I don't know, relate. and ironically normalize those kinds of people, especially if you just kind of like gain an understanding of like maybe the monster's existence or the monster's alleged purpose, or maybe that the monster is not something to be detested or destroyed. You gain an understanding, and it is important to gain an understanding with folk that you don't that you think are strange.
Yeah.
Or maybe at the beginning you think, oh, that's fucking disgusting, or that's terrible, So queer coding monsters and everything's like that, from my perspective, and hopefully from like an increasing number of people's perspective, can do that for them too. Other than that, I mean, give me bisexual monster girls, it's fine.
I mean, I support this.
I just want to this is not from my perspective. I think a lot of these are a lot more relevant for non-cis folk, and I just wanted to like throw a shout out there.
Yeah.
Like there's another layer on top of that. Like, while it's nice to have like the gay representation, there's also a lot of non-cis people that have found even more representation in that, which makes me smile even more.
Oh yeah, just to clarify, when I say queer, I mean that in like the sweeping term.
Oh no, I know. I was just referring to myself. Like that's
like gender and sex non-conforming sort of shit.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. As long as I'm understood.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I just to build off that point as well, Gabe, I think that one of the nice things about a lot of these kind of monstery sorts of changes in particular is they can be spun so easily to be in a like gender affirming way that I think is really fucking cool. Like particularly when you think about werewolves as an example, I've definitely seen media or like mostly like art within the TF community where it's like someone feels like they are a certain way when they're human, but then when they change into a monster, like not only do they feel more self-actualized from just being a monster, but also like maybe like their gender changes as well, and they feel like they can more like readily embrace themselves. And I think that's always a really interesting way because again, those things like classically have been determined by society to be like monstrous, but within the transformation community it can be something that's really affirming.
Not even just affirming, it can make you feel safe, because if you're turning into like monster quotations, then you can defend yourself and others.
Exactly.
There's just like so many layers as to why that can work for somebody. Yeah. I do have one other thing that I just realized about the appeal of the monster, though.
Yeah.
It is way easier to justify, like, wanting to fuck a monster, because you can easily make up all the rules, and they can make sense, and people will just have to eat it. Even if they're just like, well, I don't believe it. I'm like, but those are the rules, bitch. That's what they fucking are. That's what I just told you. Well, it's disgusting because it's like that. I'm like, but it's not like that. Why? Because I fucking said so, and look at all the evidence that I just made up for the thing that I just made up. Fucking yeah. Monsters are a great way to circumvent
a lot of those things.
Yeah, but again, if you want to frame it in the other way,
you could too.
You could, and you could easily go right back into that. It's all about the framing. But monsters are a pretty easy way also to just have that kind of like sexy fun time as well, because then you're not really thinking about imprinting like a perceived idea of what it's like to be a thing, or to like not have a certain mind, or to be like dominated by certain instincts. You can have like more fun. And you can also kind of not worry about it, which is why, again, with the snake painting, because I'm very proud of myself for that one, I didn't just make a big snake. I wanted to make sure that it was some kind of monster, because it's more fun that way.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's definitely, like, because you can create and craft the universe in which this thing exists, or this person exists, like, you have a lot more freedom with what then the end result is.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. And then, I think there's also been kind of a trend that I've noticed, and this isn't like specific just to TF media, like I think this has been in general. There's been kind of a trend towards making monsters less like quote unquote monstrous and being like friendlier. So like, the trend towards like monster like partner, or boyfriend or girlfriend or what have you. And obviously this is a subversion of what it means to be like a classical monster, but does that subversion take away at all from the initial appeal that many people had towards like pure monster vibes, which itself was already subversive?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting take, but I don't think it subverts it so much as it becomes a self-actualization.
Interesting.
Like the kind of like the end goal. It's like we see monsters, we're fascinated, we're scared, we're fascinated by them. We become so fascinated by them that they enamor us. The monster can consent, sexy fun times. Kind of like the end result of leading up towards it.
Yeah.
I think about humans fucking angels and creating Nephilim. Do you know about that?
I have not actually. I have no idea what you just said. Like that, there were like many parts of that sentence I did not understand.
Without getting into anything that I do know, one of the things in like biblical scripture is, oh, do you know why the world was flooded in the first place for 40 days and 40 nights? It was to kill all the Nephilim because the angels went down to earth, thought the humans were beautiful, and they fucked, and they spawned lots of inhuman, monstrous children. And God decided they needed to be wiped off the face of the world.
Is that actually in the Bible? See, this is my lapsed Catholic ass doesn't know what the hell is going on.
Yeah, you see, they never teach you the fun stuff.
No, they don't.
They never teach you the fun stuff. So that's the thing. And I think about like, but like without getting like off the point completely, like, is it a subversion? Yes. Is it a disappointment? No. Subversion, I think, the way that question was framed to me kind of feels like it's subversive. Do you think that kind of makes it like less fun? Oh, fuck no. Please, like, I want to see like all kinds of like different like weird humanoid like whatevers, or sometimes like not humanoid. If you like, look at Mass Effect. Mass Effect has like really cool fucking aliens, and
let me fuck Garrus, BioWare. God damn it!
And you see, that's like one of the fun kinds that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And they should let you fuck Garrus.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's just like, yeah, it's a subversion, but it's by no means disappointing. I think it would be fucking awesome. Just like if they're just like, oh, the monster is actually like whatever. Well, I mean, okay, if you see a giant squid for the first time in your life and you've never seen anything like it, I mean nothing like it.
Yeah.
You've never seen anything more with than like 6 legs and something that lives on land. You're like, that's a monster. A monster is very much an umbrella term for like a scary thing we've never seen before. Mm-hmm. The moment we categorize it and we use that to like gain a general understanding of it, it ceases to become one, and then the label becomes kind of like I don't know, semantic a bit.
Yeah, no, that's
superficial in a way.
Yeah, superficial.
So, like, I mean, after a while, I guess you could argue that if they did become normalized like that, they wouldn't really be monsters anymore now, would they? Mm. But to like the general thing of the question, like, the subversion is fine. I like the idea of being able to get close to something like that, and because it's what I want. I think it would be fun for a lot of other people too.
Yeah.
Let people want to familiarize themselves with things they don't understand, if only to understand them. Mm-hmm. You don't have to love it. Just your mind is more at peace most of the time if you just get the thing you're looking at.
Yeah.
And yeah, sure, fucking go for it. I like that.
And again, I don't think it's a bad thing either. I simply posed a question because I think it's an interesting question. But I don't know, Gabe, if you had any closing thoughts on that too.
I had no fun answering that question.
I'm sorry.
I'm
sorry.
Stupid show.
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. Well, I have 2 questions that I'd like to get both your thoughts on before we close out. The first one comes from Postal Roo. And Postal Roo asks, of the avatar or name that you use for your furry and TF art, what do you prefer to treat yours as? Either a brand name for your work, a representation of yourself and your preferences, or as a fleshed out character that's different from your own, and then why?
Mine is just me. And it sort of turned into the brand as I developed a brand. But it's just me as a horse or a wolf or a wyvern or however many things I decide to TF into. It's just me in a different body. Me experiencing those different sensations.
Yeah, no, that's fair. How about you?
For me, it's the same. It's just me, but with bells and whistles and different ways to express myself. It's funny because before I don't even use my own character as a way to outwardly represent myself in everything. Mm-hmm. For a long time, it was just like, I like Knuckles, so I'm going to put Knuckles as an icon. But people would remember that. Oh, yeah. They were like, oh, look, it's Knuckles. And they would just imprint that upon me. They were like, oh, hey. And it's just people don't realize. Some people like kind of get it, but very few do. So it'll be like, what does your name mean? I'm like, it's just my astrological sign, and K is for Knuckles. That's it. It doesn't mean anything very fucking special. But now, my moniker has like a different meaning to me, and also I decided to make a character for myself that I think is fun. I feel comfortable doing that, and I like playing with it, and I have found the benefit in representing myself that way. It's extra avenue of expression. Yeah. And also because, and I don't know if Gabe feels the same way I do, but it's like I couldn't, no matter how much I disliked myself, I couldn't think of myself in any other way but being me, as abstract as that sounds.
No, I'm very much the same way. It's hard to actualize anything that isn't me, despite the aspects of me that I don't like. I have done my best to work on them throughout my life, and yeah, I see this as just a personification of me.
Yeah, and I think that's cool because then again, like we mentioned earlier, you know, you get closer to like self-actualization.
It's funny, I learned that you are the same astrological sign as me. I didn't know that, so we're both Libras.
October?
End of September.
End of September.
Yeah, because it's on the 22nd. Anyways, to answer the question, though. There you go. To answer the question, though, I actually am a little different in the sense that I started as it being a fleshed out character that was wholly different from myself. And then through the power of TF, I have become more like my character. So, you know, I would say that, like, the name that I use online, like, it does represent me and my preferences, but I, like, also, to some degree, self, like, idealized in that name. And as, like, over time, as I've, like, worked on myself, I've, like, grown closer to that name in terms of embodying, I think, the elements that I had already like originally associated with it.
Oh, that's cool. It's funny. I made another character a long time ago. It's a character I still keep, and it is the opposite. It was really just a self-insert. I'm like, man, if I had all this stuff I could do, I'd be like that. And I attached a different name to it. And then over time, I realized that I wanted something different out of it.
Yeah.
And that instead of it being me, like I'd also like to say, and I've said this before a bunch. I don't know if I ever said it on any of the recordings, but everything we make is a little piece of ourselves.
Oh yeah.
Regardless. So I'm like, this will not be me, but it's going to be these parts of me, these things I like, these things I want to see, these things I want to be, you know, and that's going to be its own thing.
Yeah.
And it holds a special place in my heart that I want to do something with someday still. Yeah. But it went backwards for me.
Yeah, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's honestly how I approach all of my like TTRPG characters. Like every D&D character I have is like a different part of me, but like framed in a different way.
Yeah. So, I fucking did one RPG where it was just like, man, I don't really feel like doing this right now, so I'm gonna be like stoic as fuck.
Yeah.
And I lean into it.
So then the last question I have is from Madame Chakat, and she asks, in a world transformed, how would we theoretically distinguish TFEs from animals? Would we have to do something similar to what we do with ID cards? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
It's ID cards are like the way that we think like day to day. Like, show your ID card. Identify somehow that you have gone through this experience, so that you are blah blah blah. We can do that in a bunch of other ways now. Little chips, bracelets, fucking tattoos if you got it. A little tag on your ear if you're into that or if you want it. You know, all kinds of ways. I think it would be pretty good because if you went through like a worldwide event where a bunch of people got changed into something else, it'd be pretty good to document that and keep track of those people for a variety of reasons. So yeah, I mean, sure, that would be a thing to do. I think, yeah.
Yeah. I think this just opens the door for some really cool dystopian future ideas where various allegories are made that I won't get into the specifics of. I actually kind of did a series like this. It was basically my scenario had people who fully transformed could be set up in like certain areas specifically for the transformed, but then there was that degradation of I'm fully transformed, I have to live like an animal now, and you know, how is this impacting my life? And also I was more interested with the series with the mid-change, but again, that doesn't really answer the question. But yeah, I think you would you would hopefully have those systems in place, but I really feel that they could be abused, and that could lead to a lot of interesting scenarios to reflect on for universe building.
No, I agree. I don't have anything new to add to either of those. I think y'all encapsulated what I was going to say.
There is a porn doujin in which the setting is pretty much that. There was a worldwide event where a bunch of people turned into... Actually, yeah, they did elaborate on it, like, super briefly. It's kind of like the great power of the universe decided that humans sin too much, so they punished them by turning them into, like, animal-like versions of themselves. So it's like everybody's like a bunch of anthro types of things. Everything from just like, oh, look, a bunny girl, to like, this one has arms very much like a mantis sort of thing now. So it was like, it was all like a worldwide karmic punishment sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And they threw in a little bit of world building where they're just like, people try to get surgeries to try to correct themselves, but they're very rough experiences. They don't really work too well, and sometimes they're actually the worst thing you could possibly do.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, so some of these people desperately want to be the people they were. Doing it is probably dangerous, so how do you accept that? And you get that little bit to think about just before the porn starts. And I'm like, and this is why I remember.
Yeah, I mean, it makes it memorable. That's for sure.
And like, everybody's gonna have to remember, like, oh yeah, we were all like human as we knew ourselves, and now we're like essentially not. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure all of them will have to work with like their own identification, how they work. Because, if your face changes a lot, how are you going to work with that?
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a good point. Well, that was the end of all the questions that I had. I don't know if y'all had any parting questions or thoughts for me.
Zill, how do you feel about doing this kind of interview process, like with you and I in the same place?
It's interesting. I definitely think that, one of the differences between like, doing it like generally like with just other people in a different location and I'm talking to them, you don't always get like, physical visual cues and stuff like that, and you do get that when you're actually like in a place with someone and actually like talking about things. And to me, I think that can be quite helpful. So it's a nice change of pace.
If the show ever gets big enough, we could get a little studio. People can come on over. If people are comfortable being filmed, we can either just like watch us. We can actually be talking and shit. Yeah.
The real solution is to do this in VR.
Oh,
yes. You're right. So, but we're working toward that.
We're working towards that, maybe.
Yeah. That's gonna be the result of like COVID era shit, and we're gonna have like some interesting things to experiment with, aren't we?
In front of a live VR audience. Oh, awesome. Thank you so much both for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And honestly, I really enjoyed chatting with you both about this stuff. I know we got into some thornier topics, but I think you both had really interesting perspectives to share. If folks are looking for you online, where can they find you? And I'll start with Gabe.
Well, I'm mainly on for Affinity, Gabriel Moon, GABREL Moon, MON. I'm on Patreon, patreon.com/GabrielMoon. Twitter is GabrielMoonTF, and I'm on a few other sites, but they're not too big. I mostly post on those ones first.
Yeah. And you?
I'm on Twitter, at the K-Libra. I think it's the_ then K_Libra, mm-hmm. because that's how Twitter has to do it. And on FA, I'm just K-Libra. I do have a Patreon, but I got to work on that a little bit. But yeah, you can find me in those places, and I try to make what I can.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Always feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah. Well, thank you both, and thank you again to everyone who's spent all this time listening to the podcast. I very much appreciate it. As always, if you want to support us as well, you can go to our Patreon, which is TFTuesday Pod. And in the meantime, my name is Zill. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope everyone has a great week.
Wait.
What?
If you're on YouTube, like, share, and subscribe to this. Do it.
I was going to say it if you
comment.
didn't. I was waiting.
Tweet questions at us at #TFTuesdayPod.
See, you're better with this engagement stuff than I am.
Because I want this.
Yeah, I
want
know.
this. And I would like simple ways for people to just help the show in like incremental little ways. Giving your money can be very tough.
Yeah.
But those are tiny ways that actually can stack up to like really good stuff. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. I literally forgot, so thank you for that. No,
Okay.
as you could tell. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Hope you all have a great week. We'll be back again next week with the final part of our season. And I hope that you all keep an open mind and stay TFy, and I will see you all next week.
See ya.